Hey there, everybody. Nice to see you again. Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. So, about 2,300 years ago, 250 BC approximately, there was a feller by the name of Eratosthenes, and he lived in Alexandria. And he was a scientist kind of a guy, and one day a report came across his desk, and it said that in a town about 200 miles south, I could be wrong on the distance, but it was something like that, a town called Syene, there was a well, a deep well that didn't cast a shadow on the longest day of the year at noon. And, Eratosthenes thought that was interesting. Most people would probably not and say, so what? Maybe rightly so. But Eratosthenes was kind of a brilliant guy. And he said to himself, okay, that's interesting. I wonder, maybe I could run a little experiment with that. And so basically the bottom line comes down to is 2,300 years ago, he mathematically proved that the Earth was round. And I'll throw the diagram up here if I can to show you how he worked all that out. But the point that I'm trying to make is, like, it's the anomalies, it's the things that don't make sense. Like, it didn't make sense to Eratosthenes why a well would, why the sun wouldn't cast a shadow in that well. And so he investigated, okay? Because Eratosthenes was going against the prevailing wisdom. The prevailing wisdom and the common knowledge of his time, and unfortunately for a couple of thousand years afterwards, was that the Earth was flat. And Eratosthenes was willing to question whether the common knowledge, whether the prevailing wisdom was correct. So, and that's a good thing. I mean, that's how we learn. When there's an anomaly, when there's something out of the ordinary, when something goes against the common wisdom, the common knowledge, that needs to be investigated. So what does that have to do with what I'm talking about? So Ian Wirth did a video a couple months back he was using the Canon R5. He had rented one, and he was comparing it against his X-H2 40 megapixel Fuji. From what I could tell, from what I saw, was his conclusion was it was 6 of one, half dozen of another, 50-50. And so that's interesting. So the 40 megapixel X-H2 provides approximately the same image quality as the approximately 45 megapixel Canon R5 full frame. Well, that kind of goes against the prevailing wisdom that full frame is always better than APS-C. And that's interesting, but now you compare that or add to that my experience with the Nikon Z7II, particularly after I started using the DxO image processing for my Fuji files, and I came away with the same conclusion when I was A/B comparing and printing, and A/B comparing prints as well. My X-T5, my X-H2 40 megapixel APS-C sensor produces approximately the same image quality as the 42 megapixel Nikon Z7II. And I tested that pretty extensively. That's had me thinking, like, that goes against the prevailing wisdom. And to the point where the prevailing wisdom is so ingrained, most people would never consider an APS-C camera having image quality equivalent to any full frame. But that's not my experience, and that wasn't Ian Wirth's experience. It was just me, okay, but now we've got two different full frame camera systems and two different photographers who were willing to question the prevailing wisdom and the common knowledge and see what the results really are. And we both came away with kind of the same conclusions. Well, we both came away with the same conclusions. It's 6 of one, half dozen of another. So why is that? In my head, that doesn't make sense, because everybody knows APS-C is not as good as full frame. And I've narrowed it down to two possibilities, or two reasons why I think that that this is the case. And the first one, and I did a video on this, and I'll post a link to it up here. The first one is that Imaging Resource did an article a few years back, and I don't know whether it's still up or not because they went out of business, that the Fuji engineers, when they designed the X transfilter array, were designing it for lenses that would be available in the future. So the Fuji engineers were designing the X-Trans sensor for when we got to the point that we were at 26 or 40 megapixels, that X-Trans filter array would be able to take advantage of the theoretical sharpness limits of the lenses, more so than the bare sensor array. It's complicated, and you really need to see the article or at least watch the video that I made on that. So basically, it's that the X-Trans sensor X-Trans filter array is able to extract more sharpness data, more resolution from the lenses than a bare filter can. Okay, so that's a plausible possibility, and I'm sure that contributes to it as well. I know that I saw when I finally got to the point when I was using DxO Photolab 6 to convert my Fuji RAWs, that was the point when I was finally seeing the full capabilities of the X-Trans sensor. So much so that even my X-T5 files from a few years back showed significant improvement being processed through the DxO Photolab 6. If I were an Adobe user, Lightroom user, or if you're an Adobe Lightroom user, then you could get the exact same results just by using DxO Pure Raw 3 plugin for Adobe, processing your RAW, making a DNG file, bringing it into Adobe. You'll extract the same levels of image quality. Just a side note there. So that's the first reason, is that the X-Trans sensor allows for sharper lenses to be made or designed, and so there is that. The second thing is that, or the second reason I can come up with, is that, it's very easy to, if you go outside your front door, it's very easy to say the earth is flat, because even if you stand on a high mountain, it all looks flat, right? When you get to about 35, 40,000 feet, you can kind of, over 40,000 feet. I was in a Learjet and I saw it. We were up about 45,000 feet. If you look out the window, you can see the curvature of the earth on the horizon, and it's way cool. But most people don't get that experience. But if you walk out your front door, the earth is flat, right? That's easy to understand. So it's also easy to, but that's a wrong conclusion, right? Just as by thinking that a 40 megapixel APS-C sensor is the same as a 40 or 45 megapixel full frame sensor. Okay, and where what you need to take into consideration is that it's not about the number of pixels, it's about the number of pixels per a given area. And that's called pixel density. And so the pixel density of a 40 megapixel APS-C sensor, it would be the equivalent of a 90 megapixel full frame sensor. Every time I say that, I always get a few comments where people are saying, well, 1.5 times 40 megapixels is 60 megapixels, so it's not 90 megapixels. And that's linear math, and we're doing two-dimensional math. So what you have to do is you have to take the width and the height, and so it's the width times 1.5 and the height times 1.5, which gets you, a result, and then that result you multiply by 1.5, and you get to about 89 million plus pixels, which we round off to 90 megapixels. So I put the math in here so you could see it. If you had a 90 megapixel full frame camera, and they haven't come out with that yet, but so there's no such thing as a 90 megapixel full frame camera. But if you had a 90 megapixel full frame camera, there's no doubt in my mind that the image quality would be better than a 45 megapixel full frame camera. And that's why if the 40 megapixel APS-C sensor is the equivalent in pixel density of a 90 megapixel full frame sensor, it's only about equal to a 45 megapixel full frame sensor and not better than. So that accounts for the loss in image quality from a 90 megapixel full frame sensor. And that also accounts for why the 40 megapixel APS-C sensor provides approximately equal image quality results to a 45-ish megapixel full frame camera. I know I'm throwing around a lot of numbers and a lot of APS-C, full frame, this, that, and the other thing. The bottom line comes down to is if you want full frame image quality, okay, you can get a full frame, but you can also get a 40 megapixel APS-C Fuji camera and get equivalent results to a Canon R5 or a Nikon Z7II. And I think these are the reasons why. And so if you're not satisfied with the size and the weight and the cost of the full frame options out there, you can buy a less expensive, smaller, lighter Fuji system with the 40 megapixel sensor and have equivalent image quality. That goes against the prevailing wisdom, and that goes against the common knowledge. But I think it's an important thing, important points to make. And I think it's an important thing to say. And it's an important thing to get out there. You know, I've done the testing. I've seen it myself. And to a certain extent, Ian Wirth has corroborated that. And so there it is. Really cool stuff. And it's why I use Fuji. And there's no compelling reason for me to go to full frame. If I wanted better image quality right now when they come out with a 100 megapixel or a 90 megapixel full frame, that's a different equation, okay? But for right now, I am perfectly satisfied with my X-T5 and X-H2 40 megapixel APS-C sensor Fuji cameras for still photography, because I know I'm getting the same image quality as I would get from a Nikon Z7II or a Canon R5. If you want to shoot the full frame and you're fully behind full frame, go for it. And if you don't mind the size, the weight, and the cost, awesome. If you're looking for an alternative that gets you the same image quality, give the Fujis a shot. That's all I'm saying. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. If you want something better than a 45 megapixel full frame camera or a 40 megapixel APS-C Fuji, well, then you're going to have to be looking at the Hasselblad H2, X-T2, whatever it is, or the Fuji GFX medium format. You really need to make that jump. So there it is. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and we'll see you out there. Have a great one. Bye.